In 2023, NASA launched a spacecraft worth $1.2 billion toward an asteroid made almost entirely of metal, an asteroid so valuable that if you could somehow drag it back to Earth, it would be worth more than the entire global economy, $10 quadrillion, just floating out there between Mars and Jupiter. And on its way there, Psyche's cameras started sending back images, dozens of them. NASA published nearly all of them, enhanced them, color-corrected them, released them in high resolution for the world to see. Except one. There's one image that NASA quietly uploaded at the lowest possible resolution, with zero enhancement, and has never once mentioned in a press briefing. And when independent researchers asked for the raw data, they were told the file was undergoing review. That was over a year ago. Nobody was paying attention to the Psyche mission back in 2017 when a planetary scientist named Lindy Elkins-Tanton first pitched the idea to NASA. At the time, it sounded almost absurd. She wanted to send a spacecraft to visit what might be the exposed core of a dead planet. Not a comet or a moon, but the actual metallic heart of a world that was destroyed billions of years ago by collisions in the early solar system. The asteroid is called 16 Psyche, and it sits in the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. It's roughly 280 kilometers across, about the size of Massachusetts. And unlike almost every other asteroid we've ever studied, it appears to be made primarily of iron and nickel, the same metals that make up Earth's core, roughly 3,000 kilometers beneath your feet right now. Think about that for a second. We've never been able to study a planetary core directly. We can't drill that deep into our own planet. The deepest hole humans have ever dug, the Kola Super Deep borehole in Russia, only made it about 12 kilometers down before the rock became too hot and too soft to continue. The Earth's core sits 250 times deeper than that. So when scientists say 16 Psyche might be an exposed planetary core just sitting in open space, waiting to be photographed and studied, that's not a routine discovery. That's potentially one of the most significant objects in the solar system. Elkins-Tanton spent years making the case. Budget hearings, peer review, competing proposals from other missions that wanted the same funding. NASA's Discovery program only selects a handful of missions per cycle, and the competition is brutal. But in January 2017, NASA officially selected Psyche. The mission was greenlit. The spacecraft launched on October 13, 2023, from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, riding a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket into deep space. It carried a suite of instruments, including a magnetometer, a gamma-ray spectrometer, and most importantly for this story, a pair of multispectral imagers. High-resolution cameras designed to photograph the asteroid's surface in multiple wavelengths of light, capturing details invisible to the human eye. The plan was straightforward. Psyche would cruise through the inner solar system, swing past Mars for a gravity assist in 2026, and arrive at the asteroid in August 2029. During the cruise phase, the cameras would run calibration tests, snapping images of known objects like star fields and Mars to make sure everything was working properly before the real photography began at the asteroid. And this is where the story gets interesting. Because during those calibration runs, as the spacecraft pointed its cameras at various targets, NASA's image processing pipeline was doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The Psyche team would receive raw image data, process it, enhance it, and upload it to the mission's public archive. Starfield calibrations, instrument test shots, approach images. Everything went up. Everything got the standard treatment of noise reduction, contrast adjustment, and color correction, everything except one frame. In early 2025, a batch of calibration images was uploaded to NASA's Planetary Data System, the public archive where all mission data is supposed to go within 6 months of acquisition. And buried in that batch, tagged with a generic calibration file name, was an image that didn't match the others. The resolution was noticeably lower than every other frame in the set. No enhancement had been applied, no color correction, no noise reduction. Just raw, unprocessed pixels at the minimum exportable quality. An amateur astronomer in Porto, Portugal, was the first to notice it. He'd been systematically downloading Psyche calibration data as a hobby, comparing the images to track the spacecraft's trajectory and camera performance over time. He knew what standard calibration frames looked like, and this one didn't fit. The field of view was different, the exposure time was unusual, and the content of the image, even at that degraded resolution, showed something that didn't align with any known calibration target on the Psyche mission's published schedule. He posted about it on a European astronomy forum. Just a casual observation, hey, does this look weird to anyone else kind of post. Within 48 hours, the thread had been viewed over 2 million times. Other researchers started pulling the same file from the archive. They ran their own analysis, trying to squeeze more detail out of the low-resolution image. Basic sharpening, deconvolution algorithms, stacking techniques that amateur astronomers use routinely on their backyard telescope images. The results were inconclusive, but they were strange enough to keep people digging. And then something happened that turned a niche astronomy discussion into a genuine controversy. NASA restricted download access to the file. No announcement, no explanation. The image was still technically listed in the archive, but attempts to download the raw data returned an error message stating the file was undergoing calibration review. Now, to be fair, NASA does occasionally pull files from public archives for recalibration. Instruments drift, data gets corrupted during transmission, metadata gets mislabeled. It happens, and it's usually resolved within a few weeks. The file goes back up with corrections, and nobody thinks twice about it. This file has been under review for over a year, and that's the part that doesn't sit right with a lot of people in the astronomy community. Not because they think NASA is hiding alien artifacts or secret moon bases. The serious researchers who are asking questions about this image aren't conspiracy theorists. They're the same people who spend their weekends processing telescope data and writing Python scripts to track near-Earth asteroids. They just want to know why one image from a publicly funded mission is being treated differently from every other image that mission has produced. If you want to understand why this particular act of institutional silence hit a nerve, you have to understand NASA's history with controversial images, because this isn't the first time the agency has found itself in an uncomfortable position between what the cameras captured and what the public was told. The most famous example is the face on Mars. In 1976, the Viking 1 orbiter photographed a mesa in the Cydonia region of Mars that, in the low-resolution image, looked remarkably like a human face. NASA scientists immediately recognized it as a trick of light and shadow on a natural rock formation. They said so publicly, but the image had already captured the public imagination, and no amount of rational explanation could undo the viral spread of the face. It took 25 years for NASA to put the controversy fully to rest. In 2001, the Mars Global Surveyor photographed the same mesa at much higher resolution, and the face dissolved into an unremarkable pile of eroded rock. The case was closed, but the damage to NASA's credibility among certain segments of the public had been done, not because NASA lied, but because the initial low-resolution image created a mystery that higher-resolution data took decades to resolve. Then there's the STS-48 footage from 1991. The Space Shuttle Discovery's external camera captured what appeared to be a bright object changing direction in orbit, seemingly in response to a flash of light from the Earth's surface. UFO researchers claimed it was evidence of a spacecraft being fired upon. NASA explained it as ice particles being disturbed by a thruster firing, which is exactly what the physics supports. But the footage circulated for years because NASA's initial response was dismissive rather than detailed. They treated the question as beneath them, and that silence gave the conspiracy room to grow. The pattern is always the same. An ambiguous image gets captured. The explanation is probably mundane, but the delay between the image and the definitive explanation creates a gap, and that gap fills with speculation, distrust, and increasingly wild theories. Which brings us back to the Psyche image. What could possibly be in a calibration frame from a spacecraft that's still millions of kilometers from its target asteroid? There are several serious hypotheses, none of which require aliens or cover-ups. The first and most likely possibility is that the camera captured something during the Mars flyby that was unexpected, but not necessarily extraordinary. Mars has two small moons, Phobos and Deimos, and their exact positions aren't always perfectly predicted in advance. If one of those moons happened to be in the field of view during a calibration exposure, the image might show something that needs to be cross-referenced with ephemeris data before NASA can publish it with accurate labels. Releasing an image with an unidentified object in it, even if that object is just Deimos from an unusual angle, would create exactly the kind of viral misidentification that NASA has learned to dread. The second possibility involves the camera itself. The multispectral imager on Psyche operates across several wavelengths, and during calibration, it's not uncommon for optical artifacts, internal reflections, lens flares, or sensor anomalies to appear in the data. If one of those artifacts looked unusual enough to require investigation, NASA might pull the image until their optical engineers can determine whether the camera has a problem that needs to be addressed before arrival at the asteroid. A camera malfunction on a $1.2 billion mission would be significant news, and confirming it before announcing it would be standard procedure. The third possibility is more intriguing. During the cruise phase, Psyche's cameras have been pointed at regions of space that haven't been imaged at this particular wavelength and resolution before. There's a slim but real chance that the camera captured a previously unknown object, a small asteroid, a distant comet, or even debris from a prior space mission drifting through an unexpected orbit. Cataloging a new object requires careful verification through multiple observations, and NASA would want to confirm the discovery before making it public. And then there's the fourth possibility, the one that nobody in the professional astronomy community wants to say out loud because it sounds ridiculous, but that everyone has privately thought about at least once. What if the camera captured something on or near 16 Psyche itself, even from a great distance? Something on the surface of that exposed metallic core that doesn't look natural? Now, before you go there, consider what we actually know about metal asteroids. The answer is almost nothing. Every asteroid we've photographed up close has been rocky or icy: Ryugu, Bennu, Itokawa, Eros. All rock. 16. Psyche will be the first metallic body we've ever seen in detail. And metallic surfaces do something that rocky surfaces don't. They reflect light differently. They create specular reflections, bright glints that can look like structures or patterns, even when they're just the natural geometry of cooling metal. A solidified iron-nickel surface that formed from a molten planetary core 4.5 billion years ago could have crystalline patterns, metallic ridges, or reflective planes that would look absolutely bizarre in a photograph, especially a low-resolution one. That's the real danger of releasing an unenhanced, low-resolution image of something nobody has ever photographed before. It invites pareidolia, the same psychological phenomenon that made a mesa on Mars look like a face. Except this time, it would be happening on a surface that actually does have unusual geometric properties because of its metallic composition. If you're finding this breakdown useful, subscribe. I cover deep dives like this on space, science, and the stories the mainstream coverage skips. New videos every week. So where does this leave us? The Psyche spacecraft is currently on its way to the asteroid. The Mars Gravity Assist is happening this year, and if everything goes according to plan, the spacecraft will enter orbit around 16 Psyche in August 2029. When it does, those same multispectral cameras will photograph the entire surface at resolutions that would make the current controversy irrelevant. Whatever is or isn't in the disputed calibration image will be answered definitively by thousands of high-resolution photographs taken from orbit, but 3 years is a long time to wait. And in the meantime, the astronomy community is split. On one side, professional planetary scientists are largely quiet about the image. Most of them view the restricted access as routine data management, nothing unusual, nothing worth commenting on. The ones who have been asked about it directly tend to give variations of the same answer. Data gets pulled for review all the time. Calibration issues are common. The image will probably be re-released with corrections, and nobody will remember the controversy. On the other side, independent researchers, amateur astronomers, and science journalists are pushing for transparency. Not because they think NASA is hiding something dramatic, but because the lack of communication is itself the problem. A one-paragraph statement explaining why the image was restricted would have ended the speculation immediately. Instead, the silence has let the story grow from a curiosity into a genuine controversy that now has millions of people paying attention. And this is the part that goes beyond one image from one mission. NASA has struggled with this exact tension for decades. The agency's scientists are trained to be cautious, to verify everything before making public statements, to avoid the embarrassment of having to walk back a premature claim. That caution is usually a strength. It's why NASA's announcements carry weight. But in the age of social media and instant global communication, caution without communication looks like concealment. And the line between "we're being careful" and "we're hiding something" disappears the moment you stop explaining which one it is. The Freedom of Information Act requires that data from publicly funded missions be made available to the public within established timelines. NASA generally follows this policy more transparently than most government agencies. Their planetary data system is a model for open science. But the Psyche image sits in a strange gray area, technically listed, practically inaccessible, and officially unacknowledged. There's a concept in information theory called the Streisand effect, named after what happened when Barbra Streisand tried to suppress aerial photographs of her Malibu mansion. The act of suppressing information draws more attention to it than the information itself would have received if left alone. If NASA had simply released the Psyche image at full resolution with a note saying, "Calibration artifact, see attached analysis," nobody outside of a handful of astronomy hobbyists would have ever looked at it twice. Instead, the restricted access turned a forgettable calibration frame into the most talked-about image in space exploration this year. The irony is almost poetic. An image that probably shows nothing more interesting than a lens flare or an ice particle has become a symbol of everything the public doesn't trust about institutional science. Not because of what's in the picture, but because of the empty space where an explanation should be. In 2029, Psyche will arrive at the asteroid, the cameras will switch on. And for the first time in human history, we'll see what the exposed core of a dead planet actually looks like. Whatever that image shows, it'll be extraordinary. An entire world stripped down to its metallic skeleton, frozen in space for 4.5 billion years. And somewhere in NASA's archive, there's a single, low-resolution frame that might have given us our first preview. The real question isn't what's in the image. The real question is why, in an era when NASA releases thousands of images a year, they chose this one to stay quiet about.